Jack Lovel, welcome to the First Light podcast.
Thanks for having me, James.
Yeah, my pleasure, mate. Jack, we've known each other for a long time, and you are an architectural photographer. Can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
So I'm an architectural photographer based here in Melbourne. I've been sort of here for the last 15 years. I work primarily sort of in the residential space and some sort of small to mid-scale commercial projects. Sort of alongside my commissioned work, very interested in modernist architecture and sort of have a few different creative pursuits and sort of make books primarily. And so for the last sort of few years, I've been working on a couple of other book projects as well. So yeah, always trying to balance that sort of commission v sort of creative part of my practice.
Oh, fantastic. I'm really keen to see the new book. I've heard
you.
lots about it.
Yeah, we're very, very excited. Yeah.
Good. So I might even see that today, apparently.
Yes, I've got an advanced copy just for you, James. Yeah.
Jack, we're going to dive into your work. And so most, architectural photographers are capturing buildings and homes and things. I think you really try to capture the light, which is all about, why we're here, really. But can you tell us a little bit about that and how you achieve that in your work?
Yeah, thank you for the feedback. I mean, I guess sort of in my work, really, it is ultimately sort of like driven by light. I think that's what, as a photographer, that's sort of the essence of what we are trying to capture. Translating that to sort of architecture, I think as my practice has evolved over the years, I've sort of gotten more attuned to kind of understanding how to sort of interpret light and sort of how I want to translate that into the images that I make. I think through really the process of sort of doing this Ivanov project, which we sort of collaborated on back in 2022 with an exhibition at your gallery, it was sort of through that process that I think really got me to sort of pause and kind of reflect on an architect's body of work and then sort of how I wanted to translate that into the imagery and sort of this mix between sort of documentation and kind of a creative approach. But ultimately, as a photographer, the light is sort of what's going to kind of drive me and sort of what gets me out of bed each day. So I'm definitely a believer in that sort of the best, great light can enhance even the most modest of projects. So I think that really that is kind of a driving, force in my work.
Yeah, I can see that, mate. And you did mention Ivanov in there. Can you just touch on that for a sec, because we're going to probably dig into it later, but since you mentioned it.
Yeah. So sort of the Ivanov work was a project that I started in 2016, photographing the work of sort of very iconic but probably sort of lesser well-known mid-century architect who practiced primarily in Perth for sort of the majority of his career. He did around sort of 100 houses and sort of a series of commercial projects. There's about 40 odd houses still sort of standing, and I've sort of to this point documented over 25 of them. What started out as sort of, purely documentation, I guess, evolved into more of this sort of creative pursuit. I originally set out to sort of just do an exhibition of the work, which I did in 2019. And then COVID came about, sort of put a halt to all work really for a little bit there. But what it did enable me to do is actually spend a little bit of time in Perth. And I started sort of photographing more of the interiors, and that ended up leading to a book and has kind of sort of set my career off on kind of quite a different trajectory. If it wasn't for that project, I don't think I'd sort of be where I am now and sort of, I guess, have these kind of two parts to my practice.
Yeah, tell us about both parts, mate. Like, tell us maybe where you started, how you started, and we can then talk about the other passion you've got.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So really, I guess sort of like going way back, I always wanted to be an architect. So that was sort of what I thought I wanted to do.
Really?
I applied for architecture school, got accepted. This is back in Perth, sort of in the kind of early thousands. And sort of after the meeting decided that I didn't actually really want to go through with it. I kind of lost my nerve, which a lot of architects I work with now tell me that was a great decision.
Yeah.
So on the back end of that, I actually ended up studying drafting. So I sort of did 2 years of kind of technical drafting, which at the time seemed like a really good career decision because obviously there was a lot of work over there. I had friends that were doing very well in that sector, young people that were sort of, exceeding, in their careers early on. So it seemed like a good idea, but after 2 years, I found it kind of pretty dry and sort of just decided that it wasn't really where I wanted to be going. So it was around that time, actually, on the back end of doing a little sort of trip, my first trip to New York in the US, and sort of Europe at the same time. I actually ended up doing an exhibition at a friend's gallery. I came back with a series of photographs I'd taken. I went overseas by myself for about 3 months, 2.5, 3 months, just with a camera. And so I sort of had this interest in photography. A really good friend of mine that I grew up with is a very good photographer. He lives in Paris, Jack Lovel. He had sort of shown me the ropes and kind of taught me how to shoot, in my sort of late teens, kind of just, before I got to my 20s. And then sort of I took that and kind of kept shooting. But on the back end of sort of this trip, I ended up doing a little exhibition at a friend's gallery in Perth. And from there, sort of, I had the motivation and I think the encouragement from family and some friends around me to be like, well, obviously you quite like photography and you seem to have a bit of an eye for it. So perhaps you should look at that. And sort of, I actually ended up then transferring into photography, like as sort of for my studies. And that sort of really set me off on this kind of quite different path. So I still remember the moment. It was literally in the first semester. I was having a chat with one of my lecturers and I went into it thinking, I wanted to work as a commercial photographer. I didn't actually sort of, I guess, really recognize that I could just pursue architecture. And I remember sitting there having a chat with this lecturer one day in the library and he said to me, like, that you could, when I told him sort of about my story and that what I'd done and sort of this interest in architecture and the built environment, he said to me, look, you could actually be an architectural photographer. Like people do specialize in that. Probably not so much in Perth at that time, but I more broadly, it's like that could be something you should consider. And for me, like that was kind of that light bulb moment. That was it. Like I still remember this discussion going back like, probably nearly 20 years ago now. And me sitting there going, all right, this is it. This is what I want to do. And it was perfect. It involved my love of the built environment and my interest in that. Yeah. Like I always loved cities and was drawn to sort of cities and cityscapes. I was really enjoying the sort of photography side of things. And then there was always this underlying sort of yearning to be an architect and sort of create something or make something. So to me, it was sort of the perfect kind of, pursuit, I guess. And I've sort of, ever since then, I've solely dedicated myself to that as my practice.
That's so good, mate. That's great. Because one of the questions is, when did you know? What was the moment? And was it like, can I earn a living from this?
Yeah. And look, there's always those doubts early on. I think, I studied in Perth. I was pretty keen to get out and get sort of working. So very early on in my studies, I actually went and got some assisting work with a very well-known photographer over there called Rob Frith, who was kind of the photographer, the commercial photographer. And I worked with him and carried the bags for him for a couple of years. And so that sort of was my first foray into sort of working as a commercial photographer, but I was still studying at the same time. And I remember, so it was funny, I remember some lecturers kind of, they'd get a bit miffed if I'd like missed lectures because I'd be out on shoots. And I'd sort of go back and argue with them that, wouldn't you prefer me to be out on shoots and actually working and gaining experience? I wasn't just sitting at home on the couch. Like I was actually out there like chasing the dream and trying to work out how I was going to be a photographer. Yeah. And so, it's, but in terms of like those kind of pivotal moments, I guess, if I reflect back on my career and like where I've got to and like how I got to this point, I still remember that discussion with Chris Sims was the lecturer. Like I remember it vividly. And I really thank those people for that encouragement.
That's amazing, mate. I love hearing the backstory and that moment. Yeah. I think it's, and even for maybe younger listeners who want to pursue photography or architecture, there's this moment where you could have done either. Yeah, so,
definitely. Yeah. I mean, obviously I share a studio now with a interior sort of architecture practice and for the majority of my career, that's been the case. And the more time I've spent in those spaces, and the more I've seen the day-to-day runnings of a practice and, the trials and tribulations of it, I love my part in architecture, but it's sort of always a bit on the periphery, like yourself. And sort of, I know a lot of architects, I talk to a lot of architects, but I think I made the right decision for myself. Yeah.
Good. Mate, you actually grew up in Ivanhoe home.
Yes. Yeah, I did. Well. Yeah. So I grew up in the Jordanoff house. So it's one of Ivanhoe's very first homes. So it was finished in 1954. And look, I think it's safe to say that had a pretty profound impact on me as a kid and sort of where I've ended up. It's funny, like I've talked to a few other people sort of, from different houses over the years, and there's definitely a few architects and a few other people who are sort of involved in our industry that have had that experience. But yeah, I think sort of looking back at those early years, I guess it's no surprise that I've become an architectural photographer growing up in such an iconic home. Yeah, and this whole sort of passion and love for mid-century architecture. I mean, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Could see, absolutely could see that, mate. Was there a photographer or an architect whose work completely shifted how you thought and aspired to?
I think when I sort of started, I was really influenced by this friend of mine, Jacob, who's a great photographer and still is a brilliant photographer. And sort of he kind of showed me the ropes, taught me how to use the camera. And it sort of came to me in my later teens. Like, it wasn't like I was one of those people, you hear other photographers speak about their life and their work. And some of them, like, I had a camera in my hand from age 5. Like, I wasn't that person. Like, it definitely came to me a bit later. But I feel like when I sort of decided that I wanted to work and make this my career and sort of my creative pursuit, I remember seeing some photos by Tim Griffiths for the first time, who's a very renowned, very sort of iconic Australian architectural photographer. He spent a lot of years in the US and he still works out there, but he's based back here in Victoria now. And I remember seeing some photos of his early on when I was sort of working out, where I wanted to go with my practice. And there's a photo that sort of stood out that was, he used to do a lot in sort of Southeast Asia and China particularly. A lot of like big building stuff. It's a bit of like a big building kind of like rock star photographer, yeah. Which is what I thought I wanted to be originally. And I sort of haven't ended up going down that path. But I always really admired his work. And this one image in particular, I remember seeing, was sort of taken from from sort of a little village, and then in the background it's in China, so it's sort of a village, and there's someone going past on a motorbike, and like a mum and her child there, and it's sort of looking down this little alleyway, and then there's like this big glistening sort of building in the background. It was a really stark contrast between, I think like it spoke to more than just the architecture. It was kind of more looking at, a discussion around sort of the haves and the have-nots, and sort of what's happening in some of these kind of mega cities and this boom in construction. And I just always seem to resonate with me, like that ability to capture like such a beautiful moment, but the sort of the irony in it as well. Like it's the world's awash with photos, and I think it's really hard to make photos that really truly resonate with people. But that photo is almost like etched into my memory. I don't even know if I've ever really said that to Tim. Like, I do know him and have spoken to him at different points in time, but it really sort of stood out. And I remember seeing that very early on in my practice, like probably still when I was a student, and being like, wow, like that's what excites me about sort of architectural photography, and that ability to try and find those moments and kind of, find photos that will really resonate with people.
How hard is it to capture those?
It's difficult, James. It's a mix of sort of, I think, some of it's the way we approach our work. There's the technical side of it. There's a bit of luck. It's the weather. It's the lighting. Like, you need all of those things to sort of come together to find that sort of decisive moment. Like looking back at like someone like Cartier-Bresson, like to find that sort of that moment that will get people to sort of connect with the photos you make. I think there always needs to be intention in the imagery that you're making, and you want to sort of give the viewer, like, guide them in and give them something to sort of make it like intentional where you want their eye to go. But those photos are sort of few and far between. Like, when you look across a certain photographer's career, there's always going to be a few absolutely like knockout, standout photos. Yeah. And I think it's all of those things coming together. Like, and a bit of it is luck sometimes, it's having the right person come through at the right moment, or that's something that's going to just spark joy, or, like it's really, it's not always up to the photographer. Like I think, and we are capturing something that is sort of out of our control to a degree. We don't always control the light. We don't always control the surrounding environment. We pretty much, have very limited control over those things. And it's just sort of how we work with that and kind of to, make the best of the situation at hand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there something, and this is off the cuff, mate, but is there something you've photographed maybe at a younger age and said, I've got to go back now that I know all of these little tricks. I'd love to do that again.
Yeah. I think, could I grow up in Perth, and like I know that place so well, like, and I go back and work there now. I feel like some of my early forays into photography, like if I look back at all of my like going back to like work, being in the darkroom and doing film, and sort of like all of my kind of assessments that I do when I was studying, like I photographed every building I could find in Perth, and I didn't really know what I was doing very early on, like it was all trial and error. So there's something in like yearning me that I would love to go back and, shoot a series of just like really iconic sort of very kitschy sort of like Perth buildings and sort of houses, or, like kind of like the next sort of iteration of Ivanhoe, I guess, in a way. But we're probably with the skills and the technical skills that I have now. But also I think the more my work's evolved, the more you train your eye to see different things. And I think you constantly want to, no matter what you're doing, no matter what you're making or creating, you constantly want to feel like you're evolving, and you don't want to feel like you're just repeating the same thing. So even when I look back at the Ivanhoe work that I started in 2016 and some of the last stuff I shot in the past couple of years, I can see how far the work's come and how my approach has changed because I've understood the work. I've understood his approach better. And really, I guess I'm always just wanting to, push it that bit further and make photos that are sort of going to resonate with people. But I guess, back to your sort of question, there is certainly some of those sort of my initial forays into photography, like places I'd love to go back and just shoot again. Yeah.
There's a new book in that, mate.
Oh, man, there's a few books. There's a few books I've got in the works. Yeah. If I could, I'd do the books all the time. But yeah, no, I'm trying to always seeking to find that balance.
Mate, what are some of the most important lessons you learned from those architecture work? With the photographers you worked early on with.
Yeah. Look, the assisting was amazing. I was very lucky. So I came to Melbourne in like 2012, and I remember that I arrived the very next day. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and a notepad, and I was just looking at all these photographers, and I just started like reaching out to all of them. And I went to Diana Snape, I went to Shannon McGrath, I went to Peter Bennett, Peter Clark, Sharon Cairns. It was like a who's who of like Melbourne architectural photography and interiors like of that time, and all very amazing photographers in their own right, and that sort of older generation to where I am. And I think I'm just really grateful for the opportunities that they provided. So I'll be very honest. So I'm very friendly with Diana Snape. So she's really sort of mentored me. She was kind of the first photographer to take me under her wing.
Nice.
And I've forever been grateful for that opportunity. And I got work with her, and then very quickly after the doors sort of started to open, and she told a few other photographers that I was a half decent assistant, I guess. I still felt pretty green. She definitely showed me the ropes, but it was I think seeing how to work as a commercial photographer, seeing how much you have to go to I'd say Di's sort of a big building photographer. Like really, she does a lot of really big civic projects, institutional projects. She does some residential work, but I think she's maybe a bit more well known for those sort of like larger scale projects. And it's tough work. It's hard. It's physically demanding work, and you're there at sunrise and you're there at sunset, and you're doing like 14, 15-hour days in the summer. Like it's physically taxing, and you've got to be, after like working for 10 or 12 hours is when you probably need to be most on at the end of the day, when the light's amazing and you've got to really be doing like your best work. So yeah. I think it taught me work ethic and how, you always want to push it as hard as you can. And I think this idea of light and being driven by the light, I'll always keep getting one more shot. If the light's doing something amazing, or there's like a moment that I feel like I'm missing, I'll run across the street to capture that moment. Like even if I'm exhausted, which means you kind of, I think that you're working in the right field because you constantly want to feel that inspired. But people like Di, like I said, have just been amazing. And also to teach me just how to operate and like how to protect the images that we make and how to, make it a viable, make a living out of what we do. Like it's, if it was easy, everyone would do it.
Sure.
I admire any small business owner or anyone pursuing their, like something in their creative space, whether it's like an architect, a designer, lighting designer. I think, there's a reason why not everyone does it, because it's, it's not an easy thing to like run your own business and have the creative side of it as well.
It's really tough. Yeah.
So I think it's, I've got the utmost respect for those people, but I'm also very grateful for having that experience. Like I think I nearly assisted for like 5 years before I went out on my own. So so I really I carried the bags, but you definitely got to a point where you're done. But it's, I think the things I value most about it as well is that I can go stand in a room with those photographers now, and different points of time you'll run into them at different things, and there's I'm proud that I worked with them and I learned from them, and I think they know that you sort of did it that way. It's maybe more of an old school kind of thing now, and it's not everyone's path, but I'm always proud that I sort of came up that way and sort of did it in that probably quite a traditional sort of background, and it helped me forge really great friendships as well. So, yeah,
that's so good, mate.
Yeah.
What's something? Tell us something when you first get to a project. Mm-hmm. Before you even unpack your bag, what are you looking for straight away?
I think really it comes down to I want to understand the architect or the designer's intent, like if it's a commissioned project, particularly and you're generally there with the client.
Sure.
I want to understand what it is they want to convey from this project. What did they set out to do? What was their intention, and how do they want it presented? I think our job as a photographer is I think it's quite a collaborative process. I look at it like this. Mm-hmm. obviously there's moments where, and one of the sort of joys of what we do is actually being able to show the architect or the designer elements of a project that maybe they didn't sort of pick up on, or sort of, like an aspect here, or a sight line here, or a view here, or to, and sort of those moments of joy, I guess, in the project that sort of sometimes can be overlooked. But really, when I get there, I'll generally try and, if possible, I'll try and do a walkthrough, like a site visit before, like if it, time permitting and access and whatnot. But at a minimum, I want to have a discussion with the architect if I can, and sort of really try and get a good understanding of what their intention was. Because ultimately, the photos that I make are the visual representation of that project. Yeah. And the majority of projects are only seen through the images online or in print. And so it's rare that people actually get to experience these projects. So, the architect might work on them 3, 4, 5 years, and then we have a day or two at best to photograph them. So you really want to make sure that the photos that you create are a strong representation of that project. Yeah. So there's a weight with that as well. Like I don't take it lightly. Like I know how much the clients that I work with, how much they put into these projects and how much they consider those details and the time and energy and probably some sleepless nights that have gone into it. So I always want to rock up and put my best foot forward and make sure that the work I'm making is a response to that. And sort of, to me, it's that collaborative process of really sort of understanding what their intention is and then kind of interpreting that for sort of people to, to understand through the photographs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you tell us, I know how important it is. We're talking about light.
Yeah.
How important is light when you're, you're capturing, during the day, at night? How important is it for you, mate?
The lighting's everything in what I do. It's absolutely, as the photographer, it's absolutely everything. I think you look at each project and you look at you want to shoot it on its merits and show it in its best light. I think, whether you're shooting interiors or architecture, you want some variation in the light. I don't particularly love shooting interiors on super sunny days. It's actually quite tricky to do. Yeah. I quite like softer lighting for the interiors where you get a nice transition to the outlooks and the aspects outside. But then equally, I don't particularly love really moody, like flat light for the externals. I quite like a bit of light, a bit of sun, some nice skies in there. And so it's always that balance. I think like working in Melbourne's great because the weather chops and changes all the time. So I remember a photographer said to me very early on that Melbourne's a great place to train as a photographer because you kind of always got to be, ready to go. And you know that when the light's good, you'll grab it. And so I think that, again, each project's different. You got to look at what outcome you want, look at what the designer wants in the project, where you want the project to go to ultimately. And I think you sort of work the lighting around that. I guess with what you do and sort of, it's always a mix of that sort of daylight and then kind of like, working with the lighting designers or sort of all of those elements. And I think ultimately it just makes for a better outcome. I can walk into I did a site visit the other week of a house, and the absolute standout was the pendant in the kitchen that this designer had sort of done in collaboration with the architect. And it was just the most beautiful moment in the whole project. It was actually quite breathtaking. And so, when we talked about how we're going to photograph it, instantly I was like, well, there's literally several shots of that piece alone because it's just the most joyful part of this project. And so I think like, when I talk to them about how we want to shoot it, we go, okay, we're going to plan this for spring. Let's try and get a day where the lighting's a bit softer in the morning, and then we can sort of shoot those nice interiors and we can get some nice glow and warmth out of these lights. And then hopefully the sun pops out later in the day, and then we'll sort of work with that and get some nice light in the architecture. But it's always that, I think you got to look at each project for its merits and the strengths of it, and then sort of work out how you want to, use the lighting to show that, as best you can.
So let's just say you're on a project and it's really bad light. Mm-hmm. It's a gloomy day.
Yeah.
And you're like, damn it, I wish the sun was out or whatever.
Yeah.
How do you tackle that? You can't come back tomorrow.
No, I mean, but it's funny. More times than not, you'd be surprised. Things generally have a way of working out. Like I said, I guess sort of what's nice about being based here is that yes, a lot of days in Melbourne, you'll get kind of soft light at the start of the day and then it'll open up in the afternoon. Quite often the homes that we shoot are, orientated to the west. And so you get beautiful afternoon at, light pouring in and good light on the facades. But I'll put it this way. I'll never compromise a project for the weather. Like if worst case scenario, like if you had to go back and do some shots on another day, like you'll find a way to make it work. It rarely happens that just, you've got absolutely no option of that. I mean, look, we've got a few tricks up our sleeve, but I would never compromise a shoot. Like if I knew the weather was just going to be absolutely disastrous or it's like pouring rain, like I'd just say like, no, we just can't do it. You know, like I'd never ever compromise a shoot or the outcome, because I know how much goes into these projects that we photograph. And I just know that we've got a short amount of time and we've got to get an outcome for this client. And so, like I said, there's a weight that comes with that, but it kind of energizes you, and I find it quite inspiring as well.
Yeah.
And it's sort of, that's where that kind of, that sort of collaboration comes from.
Yeah. And do you, as far as lighting goes with daylight, natural daylight, how important is it to you?
It's definitely the base level, like the starting
yeah.
point for everything that I do. I think working in Australia, obviously we have an abundance of daylight, which is great. I often wonder about like my fellow photographers and like working in London or working in, you know, New York, getting near the winter and stuff like that, how they actually go with the lighting. Because I mean, here, no matter what, there's always a good amount of light each day. If it's soft light, if it's harsh sunlight, depending on where you're shooting. I think as a photographer, one of the things I really enjoy most about my job is, depending where I'm shooting, the lighting changes a lot. So if I shoot a project in Perth or I shoot a project in Sydney, it's quite different to how I shoot in Melbourne. And so you have to sort of respond accordingly. And I think different types of like each city sort of has their own kind of like visual language. Like you kind of pick a project from Melbourne a lot of the time because of the lighting, and like you'll see more moodier, kind of more grey, sort of like flat light projects coming out of Melbourne than you would in out of Sydney or out of Perth, for example. And so I think that the daylight, what I love about working with it is the sort of the cleanness and the clarity in it. Like that sort of, you get this beautiful, depending on if you've got nice side light from the outside, from your windows, you'll have this beautiful sort of soft transition, and then the light will just sort of peter off as it moves further through the space.
Yeah.
But also that one sort of continuous shadow line I sort of really like as well. And then what's nice is that, if you've got control over sort of the lighting and the type of stuff that you guys do, you can kind of integrate that and bring that into it. But it's always sort of a balance. I never want that to sort of override the mood or the sort of feeling I'm trying to set with the daylight. Right. But at the same time, like we'll sort of use modifiers and scrims, and depending on the scene and what we're shooting, like we'll sort of try and manipulate the light to how we want it. But I guess you get very attuned to sort of working with different conditions, and you've also got time, or a lack of time. You've got to sort of get through X amount of shots really in a day and make sure you capture everything. And so that's always sort of, bubbling away in the background. So it's, I find I'm pretty sort of hyper focused when I'm on shoots. Like it's probably one thing I really like about it. You don't have time to really think about anything else that's going on, just the task at hand, which is, it's rare in life that you have that, where sort of, you just have to be solely focused on what you're doing. Like your mind can't really go elsewhere because you're just like, I've just got to get this done. Like, the light's moving, the client's going, we've got to, we've got to be out of here by this time, or,
I remember when you did this showroom.
Yeah.
You've done both of our showrooms, but this one, and like you're checking what time sunset is, and you're like, I've got to make sure to set an alarm for this because I've got to run across the road.
Yeah.
Catch that tram going past with the right light. So,
So
it's so nice to see, because we don't get involved really in this side of things, and to see you here for I
think we did about 14 hours here that day. It was big because obviously we wanted to shoot it into nighttime when obviously with the place lit up and glowing. And I think I went to sleep that night with like lighting sequences in my head of like changing, getting the assistant to kind of change the dials or Chris, the designer. And it's I think there's a good amount of preparation that goes into it, but I guess you want to go to those efforts because you want the people that you're working with to really feel like, you're understanding of their project. Like you want to get the best outcome for them, I think, always. And really, good planning will sort of always help you to get a good outcome. So it's sort of, that's why, that idea of going and seeing the projects, working out the styling. One of the first things, when I walk into a commercial project, literally the first thing I go is, where's the lighting? Like, where's the switchboard? And but first question is, what control do we have over the lighting? If we're shooting with a lot of, a lot of sort of, artificial light and kind of not as much daylight, that's the first question I'll ask. I'll sort of, I want to know what we've got and how much control we have, and then we'll sort of work our way back from there. Yeah. So it's a bit more simple with daylight. If you've just got a house and you've just got daylight, really it's sort of,
you're done.
Then you just got to kind of just chase the sun.
Yeah. Mate, for all of our listeners that are budding photographers, I think I can take a decent pic, but I'd love to share some gems with us, mate, of just, things we can do to look at, or, just ways to maybe capture some moments that you might just take for granted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good, because I did have a little bit of planning for this, so I did know this was coming up. So, look, a few sort of techniques or things I look at. Obviously, first things first, always be driven by the light. The lighting is critical. If you've got good light, you can make anything look half decent. I'm a true believer in that. If the light's good and the light's shiny, I think you can make it look half good.
And the opposite as well.
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
Or killer projects. Or a photograph. Very basic, but something I use a lot, like rule of thirds. Like when I'm looking at things, like how I divide up my shots, and sort of how I look at sort of elements of a photograph. Like going back to like that design principle of just like rule of thirds and sort of how I space things out. I think that's a really good thing to think about as a photographer, just when you sort of, visually aligning things. It's simple, but I think it can be quite effective. I would say that, and again, it's whether you're talking about shooting like a commissioned project versus just your photography in general, but don't try and turn something like a project into something that it's not. I think you need to embrace whatever your subject matter is and show it like honestly and sort of authentically. And that's, a big part of, I feel like what I do is like, that's a part of my practice is like, I want the work that I make to look good now, and I want it to look good in a decade and 2 decades, or, and sort of past that. And so, I think as the photographer, if anyone's listening, like if you embrace the strengths of whatever it is, like a project that you're photographing, and don't try and masquerade it as something else. Like I think that's something to be very mindful of. Don't try and like disguise things through like filters and like treatments and how you treat the photographs in post. Like a good photograph will stand on its own merits. Like if it's graphically and like visually strong, the post-production is kind of secondary to that. And I feel like in a wash of images and the world, like with, Instagram's kind of a blessing and a curse, because people have become far more literate in terms of like photography and sort of like talking about visuals. But at the same time, I think it's harder to cut through. So, people put work out there. There's some stuff I look at and I'm like, it might not be the greatest image, but it's kind of just shock value, like how they'll sort of, elements they'll put into it or the styling side of it. But it'd be interesting to see how that sort of looks 5-10 years down the track. I don't know. Photography's become a lot like fashion. There's a lot of trends going around.
Yes.
Yeah. But I'm in it for the long haul. Yeah. It's a long game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just on like exposures and things like that, like you tweaked my cameras.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're going back to, always exposed for the detail. Yeah. For the highlights. I think was. Sorry. Going back to some more fundamental things. Yeah. I showed you that when we were getting set up. Find the always underexposed. Make sure you got detail in the highlights and in the brightest areas. Yeah. Because you can always push the shadows a little bit if you need to and make it a little bit brighter, but it's really hard to recover detail that's not there in whatever you're shooting. Okay. So that's a good one. Yeah. I'm glad that seemed to resonate with you. So
I hope this looks good.
Go half a stop or 2/3 of an f stop under, and it's always a good starting point.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'll sort of I'll do that. It's funny when you're shooting interior stuff. I'm what I call like an over bracketer. Like I'll have exposures that I'll never use, but I'll still shoot them just in case.
Yes.
Yeah. The file count just gets out of control some days, but anyway, is what it is.
Yeah, good. How is so as LED technologies come in, you've had to probably change the way you shoot because it was just very different to halogen or fluorescent or whatever. Yeah. So how has that impacted you? I
think what's been good, it's probably more in the commercial projects I see than the sort of the residential lighting shoots that we do. But I think what's been really nice with the lighting designers and how it's come about is there's a lot more control over sort of what we can do with these lights. So in terms of how something looks on the eye and how it looks in a photograph are two very different things. And so like if I go and shoot a commercial project, like a nice workplace project for a designer, I'll probably go in and go to all these lights that you're talking about. And, I'll put it down to like 10%. Yes. And it'll look, in the space, it'll look like it's barely on. Yeah. But when the camera reads it and interprets it, it has this beautiful glow and it's filled with detail. And it's always that balance of using a bit of the daylight, a bit of sort of, the artificial light, flicking lights on and off. Like we've got a few sort of like tricks that we use to kind of get it right. But I love a project where I've got control over the intensity of the light.
Yes.
And I think as with what you do, like as the light sort of and the technology's kind of evolved, we seem to have more control, which as a photographer is the best thing.
Yes.
We want to be able to control the light as best we can. So yeah, I love a board where I can kind of go up and go, I'll basically just set it all down to virtually the lowest setting. Might look a bit off on the eye, but in the photograph, it'll read beautifully.
Yes.
So, but again, it always comes back to what mood you're trying to create as well. And that idea of sort of where you want the viewer's eye to go. If it's a beautiful pendant light in a space and that's the hero moment of the design, of course I want it to be on and glowing, and I sort of want to, have that as the brightest part of the image. So I think you look at each photograph or sort of, what you're trying to capture and then sort of work through those series of kind of techniques. But control is good. Yeah, having the more control, the better in these sorts of spaces.
Yes. Yeah. Do you often get to projects that are overlit or?
Yeah. I had one very recently actually where it wasn't the architect's decision, but the developer had gone and decided just to purchase way too many lights, and they had just plastered them all over. It was a multi-res project, and they just plastered them everywhere, much to the poor architect's. The architect basically just didn't really know how to explain it. They just sort of just said, look, we begged them not to do this, and this is what's happened. So I would say, ultimately, I think there can be overkill with lighting, definitely. I feel as a photographer, I'm very sensitive to lighting as well. Like even at home or in my spaces, I like moody lighting. I like pops of light. I don't particularly love like down light. I like having a key light and sort of anything where there's lots of shadows or lights on lights on lights. Visually, I find it, I don't like it in my work, but also just personally because of what I do. Like I don't like being in spaces like that. The lighting should sort of set the mood and the tone and kind of the atmosphere for the space. And, if you go into a bar, you want it to be dark and moody and a bit, warm and sort of inviting. And you don't want to go into a library necessarily and have that same experience. But I think that it's, ultimately lighting plays such a key role in sort of all the projects, as you know. And I think it's our job to sort of, work as best we can to kind of, capture that accordingly and sort of really set the mood and the atmosphere of the place. Yeah. But I'd say I've definitely been in some places where there's been overkill by lighting. More times than not, it's the designer's client who's kind of done it. It's been their choice. It hasn't been the designer. Sure. Like the designer knows what they want, and it's sort of, the one where they might roll their eyes and go, geez, I'm sorry. But then that's my job to kind of try and get the best outcome with that or manipulate it to obviously try and make it look as the designer intended. But it's saying that, I've seen amazing projects where maybe the lighting has been less considered and then it's kind of pulled the project down because it's just, whether it's budget constraints or, there's a multitude of sort of reasons why that might be. But the lighting is always sort of critical and kind of, setting the right atmosphere, I think, and mood for any project and how you want people and inhabitants to kind of feel in those spaces. Yeah. Yeah.
Talking about, mate, before honesty in your photography and trying to capture what it is, how do you maintain that? How do you?
Yeah, I think like in this climate and sort of, I guess it's been in this like a wash of imagery. I feel like the photos that I make, I want them to be just that, like quite an authentic representation of what I'm photographing, like what I'm shooting. I guess that this idea of kind of legacy, I think about quite a bit. And the photos that I make now, I want to look at them 10 years down the line and they still feel like they're a strong visual representation or record of that project. Obviously, there's trends and sort of fads in photography and working as a commercial photographer, you've got to kind of bend to them a bit and sort of make sure that you're kind of, work like you sort of don't want your work so far out of the kind of league that you're not going to sort of be getting commissions. But really, I think it's that idea of longevity and sort of timelessness in the work. So I think the way that we treat the photos in post, the sort of the color treatment, the grading of them, and the way that we light them, like I want it to be natural. I want people to walk into, if they have the opportunity to go to a project that I've photographed, the last thing I want for them is to be disappointed or underwhelmed. Yeah. Like that I think about that a lot. And, I want the photos to reflect obviously the best parts of the project, but to be a good, like a strong visual representation of the project. And for people, if they are able to go and see the project, to then go, oh, well, the photos stacked up and it wasn't just all smoke and mirrors. Like I really think
that's a hard thing, right? Because you're trying to take a great shot. But the last example is like it's well overlit.
Yeah.
How do I fix this?
What do you do?
You know?
Look, I think really, sometimes it's what you don't show with projects. So that's another discussion you have with a designer. Like, you don't have to show absolutely every element of a project to get a good understanding of it. But I really love this idea of people seeing a set of photographs and feeling like they've experienced or like walked through a project. I had a photographer say that to me very early on in my career, that like if you make a set of photographs of a house or a commercial project, you want people to feel like they've walked in the front door and by the end of it have seen and experienced that project as best as you can, looking at it through a photograph and not seeing it in person. But really, that idea of sort of longevity in the work that I make is, I think, really is quite important to me. And sort of, and that's really played out in the books that I'm doing, because I'm already capturing something. Generally, it's like a modernist subject that's already 60, 70 years old, and I'm making contemporary photographs of it, but I want them to be like an accurate record of them now. So people might look at my photographs in like 40 or 50 years time and use those as the reference points and go, oh, well, that's actually, that was a true representation of it. I mean, no one can, more times than not, people can't actually verify that. But I feel like there's a lot of work I look at, and if it wasn't for the filters and the wash that had sort of been done in post, the photo might not actually stand on its own merits. And it's sort of just, it's just kind of like a flash in the pan, like it sort of will grab some attention now, but how's that going to look in 5 years, 10 years? And I think that all architects, all designers should be thinking about that, not just so focused on one project or for one publication. Think about your body of work over an entire career. Like if you're in it for the long haul, there's power in having like consistency in sort of what you do, and not just bending to like the latest trend, I guess. So that idea is sort of very important to me, and I think it's something I sort of want to keep pushing in my work.
That's great, mate. Have you ever, captured a project and the feedback from the architect is, wow, we never even saw that detail, or, would have even thought of that angle, or, does that happen a lot? Yeah,
look, I think it does. Yeah, it does happen quite a bit. I think that's probably the best part of my job, actually. So like when you go, it's always this thing between like sort of, I guess, documentation and then this sort of like creative kind of side of photography. So there's certain shots that I know I need to capture of a project. Like if you walk into a home, you're like, okay, well, we need the kitchen overall, you need the kitchen vertical, you need the lounge room overall. Like there's certain, like, you need it for editorial, they need it for their website. Like it's a bit tick box sometimes. Sure. And you can be creative in the styling, or, you can sort of try and bring in some elements that make it a bit more interesting. But I think that sort of the best part of the job is those moments of joy, like where, you could be standing in a space, the light will be hitting on a particular material or like junction or sort of detail. It's fleeting, it's dropping in and out, and you can sort of find that little moment of kind of delight and then share that with the architect or the designer. And that's where they, I think, really truly see the value in you as a photographer. Yeah. So the more of those you can find, the better. But also, I think it's having that ability to tell like the narrative of a project and a story. Like I'll quite often, when I'm shooting, will show the clients like a series of photographs that I've taken of a space and go, you need to visualize it like this. Like it's not always, there's certainly going to be hero shots, but it's not always just about the hero shot. And you need to think, if you're looking at like a living or a kitchen space, I think about it in terms of like 7 or 8 shots, a couple of overall shots to sort of contextualize it and show the connection to other parts of the home. Some nice vignettes and sort of really more sort of poignant kind of moments where you're really like focusing in on sort of a particular section, and then going in on those really fine details, like a sort of, a microscopic almost level, and those tight junctions and sort of how much care and attention to detail there's been on how those materials layer up. And it's by having a series of those photographs together that I think really get people to engage with the project at different scales. And if you can throw in, some interesting light or sort of, those moments that the architect didn't necessarily think about, that's where I think they see the value in what we bring as a photographer. And also there's something to be said for having a fresh set of eyes on a project. If you've worked on a project for 3, 4, 5 years,
true, yeah.
I know it in my the creative projects, the book projects. I remember when I did the Ivanov exhibition with you, and I went to my good friend Alicia Callahan at the time, and we sat there in her living room and we laid out about 50 photographs, and I said, help me pick what I want to exhibit. I was like, I've just looked at them so much, I can't see the forest through the trees. You kind of can lose sight of things sometimes. Yeah. And so I think having good, strong collaborators whose opinions you value is really key. Mm-hmm. And what also makes it a really great, it's a great part of sort of the practice that I have and sort of what I do. But yeah, it's definitely not a solo pursuit. Like I love sort of working with, good designers, or, with the book projects, I've worked with my good friend Jake Taylor on this upcoming one we've got coming out. And, he's an architect. He's not going to tell me how to take a photograph, and I'm not going to tell him how to write about the project, but he's been on every shoot with me. We've talked about how he wants to write and sort of capturing photographs that sort of, will speak to the writing. And there's something really nice about that. Yeah, I think, people want to spend time with, with good people and sort of collaborate with like-minded people. So I find that that's a really enjoyable part of what I do.
I love it, mate. Your first book, Catching Light.
Yeah.
Really personal connection because you grew up in the on off home and things like that. And that, you said, has then brought you to this whole other part of your career. Tell us a little bit about how that's changed for you, mate.
Yeah, so I mean, the Ivanov project I started in 2016. I felt the work needed to be documented. There wasn't sort of a current record of all of it, and obviously having that really strong personal connection growing up in the house, it sort of opened the door for me. What I never realised is kind of like where it would ultimately take me. So sort of we did the exhibition together, I think it was in 22, but just after COVID.
Yep.
And then in 23, I took the Ivanov work out to Modernism Week. I was presenting out there with my friend Stuart Harrison, and we did a talk and a little exhibition of the work. So it was quite, nice to take this little project from Perth and sort of put it on, to that audience in the US. And so it was actually when I was out there, I ended up meeting an interior designer who's based in New York. His name's Timothy Godbold, a very, very talented interior designer. He's based in New York, and he actually grew up in Perth. So it's quite a random coincidence, but he reached out because he'd seen I was doing Ivanov out there, and he knew all about Ivanov growing up in Perth. So one thing led to another. We connected out there, got along very well. And then later that year, he invited me out to his home, and he lives out in Southampton, on Long Island in New York. And he sort of set up a non-for-profit called Hampton's 20th Century Modern. He was presenting it at Modernism Week, so he gave this brilliant talk when we were out there about sort of the history of modernism on Long Island. And myself and Stuart, who I was with, we were just blown away by the calibre of architecture. And I'd heard a little bit about it, but to see all of it, together, Tim gave this great talk. And it's quite amazing, sort of that chance, really encounter, sort of led to me going out there in October of 23, and we photographed 6 houses. It was sort of just the early fall or like autumn out there. So the summer season was over, all the leaves were changing colour. It's like a magic time to be out there in Long Island.
Good. Yeah.
So I spent a couple of weeks out there. We photographed 6 houses and then put the photos together, and I took them back to Tim, and he was like, oh, these are pretty good. It's like, I quite like these. And I was like, okay, well, I'm glad. And so on the back of that, we ended up taking it to a publisher. And so, yeah, I'm excited to say that sort of that book, we've ended up signing on with Rizzoli in New York. And so that will be coming out next March. So subsequently for the last couple of years after that chance encounter, I've spent the last 2 summers out there photographing a series of mid-century houses with Tim. And it's funny, if you'd come to me in COVID when we were sort of locked down and said, in 2 years' time, you're going to be like cruising around the Hamptons photographing, the Saltzman House by Richard Meyer, amongst others, I would have said you're crazy, and that's never going to happen to me. So it's been a really, obviously like an absolute pleasure and a joy to photograph, but just so nice to kind of branch out and to, I guess, really kind of spur my passion for why I got into, photography. Like I started out just doing travel photography and photographing cities and landscapes, and I never set out to become this architectural photographer. And then it's, just things, events have happened, and over time it took me down this path. And that creative side of it's really, I'm forever now trying to find that balance between sort of the books and the commissioned work. And it's a nice balance, because I love the commission work offers other opportunities and enables me to sort of then pursue those projects overseas. Or the other one we're talking about, I've got another book coming out here in September this year that's on all the houses around Studley Park in Kew. So I've been collaborating with a good friend of mine, architect Jake Taylor, on that for about a similar amount of time, about 3 years. Sort of as we came out of COVID, I was just desperate to travel and to jump into any projects I could. And sort of the Ivanov stuff had kind of gotten to a certain point, and I'd spent several years on it. I was sort of ready to do something a bit different. So it was funny, both these book projects kind of presented themselves at the same time. And it was probably mad to think I could do both of them, but I kind of just jumped on the opportunities, you know, like when these opportunities present themselves. Yeah. I remember having a talk to another photographer friend in a good mate of mine up in Sydney, and when I was debating about whether I should go over to New York that October, and I was like, oh, you know, I've traveled a bit this year and I've done, you know, done bits and pieces, and do you think it's, you know, I should do this? And he just looked at me and said, you'd be mad not to do this. Like, this is such a good opportunity. And so it's kind of, yeah, I feel like it's, you know, I've been led off on this sort of path to sort of making these books, and I just love it. It's my absolute passion, you know, and I'm excited to share them with people. And I feel like it's about making beautiful imagery, but there's something, I think, photographing and documenting all the modernist architecture, it feels like there's real meaning in it as well. Like, it's like, I feel like the process of it, but also like we're celebrating this period of architecture. The interesting thing about this, all the houses we shot over in the States, there's not really much in the way of heritage overlay or like policy in terms of protection. So what Tim does is kind of try to act as an advocate and sort of educate people as to the value of these houses. So we're hoping that the book will actually show people that they are valuable and that you shouldn't just go in and bowl them over. We're quite lucky here in Australia, like after a lot of years of knocking things down, there's actually really quite good heritage policy in place now. So the houses we photographed in Kew, like they've all got, a lot of them have got heritage overlays on them. They're not getting knocked down, but we equally think it's important just to kind of celebrate how brilliant this enclave of architecture is and how unique it is to have a series of houses by who's who of Melbourne architecture from the 50s, 60s, 70s in such close proximity to one another. Like, it's really amazing. It's very, very unique. So I'm quite excited after like 3 years of working on both projects. They're both going to come out really about 6 months apart. So it's it's you know, nice to finally see the work come to fruition instead of this kind of idea in your head of kind of what it might be. Yeah.
So I'm so keen to see it, mate.
Yeah.
What's the reaction when you knock on these doors of the people living there? What do you say?
Yeah, I think it's been good. Well, so Jake, my co-author here in Melbourne, he's really been, he started doing these walking tours in Kew around Studley Park, and that's sort of how we got a bit of traction with it. And so I think ultimately the reception's been really good. Like, I think if you go to someone and you go, I love your house, I want to photograph it, it's a really significant piece of architecture. People love it. People love people who love their houses. Like, and all the owners I've found, I'm yet to come across an owner who looks at it just for land value or for everyone who has these houses, like, it's not lost on them how significant they are in terms of their place in like modernist architectural history in Australia or in the US, or like they recognize the value and the significance of them on a multitude of levels. So, and I think people generally, you know, like working or, you know, like engaging with other people that are passionate about, you know. So if you're passionate about someone's home and you say, it's beautiful, I love it, we want to put it into a book, pretty much everyone's been very receptive. It's pretty rare that we've approached people to shoot a house and we haven't been able to get it. Some have been a bit harder than others. Yeah. And we've had, you know, the good thing is that like doors open doors, right? So we might photograph a house and then go, oh, hey, do you know so-and-so from this house? And they're like, oh yeah, I play golf with them on a Wednesday. And then you're like, oh, cool. Well, by the way, can you just drop into conversation that we want to photograph their house? And so it's going to be really nice. Like, we're planning a party for the owners when the Riverside Modern book comes out in September, and it's just going to be all the owners and the collaborators on the project. And I think it's going to be really special because that's another thing. I found it through Ivanov. Like, I never set out to, I never thought that it would sort of build a sense of community around these people, but through that book and what I foresee happening in these next couple is that if you bring all these owners together, it really does foster a sense of community because they're tied to each other by, you know, the history of these houses, the architects they worked with, and they don't necessarily all know each other. So there's something quite nice about that, about being able to sort of bring people together. And you know, I know that like all these Ivanov owners back in Perth, they all like share the same tradespeople now. And like, there's all this information and knowledge that's been shared across them because a lot of them like would meet at like the, you know, the exhibition I did or the book launch I did. So it's been, yeah, that's something I never thought about it going into it, and that's probably been something that's really special to like foster this sense of community and like connection amongst people, and you know, people who are just passionate about things that we like and really sort of positive things. Yeah,
so good. And I got some rapid fire questions for you.
Yeah, cool. Good.
Golden hour or blue hour?
Golden hour.
Yeah,
always. Yeah, love golden hour. Yeah, always chasing that sun.
Can't beat it, right?
Yeah.
Film or digital?
Oh, that's a good one. I mean, look, I shoot digital and I love my Leica. I'll say that much. Yes. It's a beautiful camera and that's one of the reasons I got it. But there's something quite nice. I've got a little point and shoot, a little Mewtwo, like a little sort of film camera that's kind of like a bit of a fun, like party sort of travel camera. And there's something that I just love about the simplicity of it, and the fact that no one can ask you to reshoot anything, or no one can ask for something to be moved a couple of centimeters. You just take the photo and you point and shoot and you walk away.
You're done.
So I'd say both. Yeah, I like both. I think it's you can't don't want to differentiate.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Favorite city in the world for architecture?
Yeah, it's a good one. There's a few. I thought Lisbon is a city I'm particularly fond of. I just loved my time there. I mean, luckily I get to travel quite a lot through work, and I've always been an avid traveller anyway. So Lisbon, Rome, I just love. I love the heat, which is probably a bit unexpected for people. Like if we're talking about contemporary architecture or sort of going back in history. I think the first time I went to Rome, I was just blown away by just the history of the place and sort of just the age of the buildings. And it's actually
back in time, isn't
truly, it's truly like stepping back in time. In terms of like beautiful, I don't go to Paris, like just walking around Paris and just all the, different cities give you different things. I think it's hard to pinpoint one. I'm really on the fence, aren't I, James?
Mate, it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
No,
and don't get me wrong, Palm Springs for modernism. I mean, I was lucky enough to be out there in April.
You with Leica as well?
Yeah, I was doing some stuff out there with Leica. Yeah. And I mean, that's like as someone who loves documenting modernist architecture, it's like my spiritual homeland. Like I love it. I've been out there like 5 times now. It is truly magical. Like anyone who has an interest in modernist architecture, you have to go and see it at least once. Yeah, it's just magic. The landscape, the desert, the light out there. It's this architectural utopia in 2 hours out of LA. It's truly magic. So but again, different cities give you different things. Depends what you're looking for. Yeah. But I'll always keep traveling and always keep seeking out different places. Yeah. Yeah.
Your passion for architecture, mate. Who is an architect everyone should study?
I mean, I've got to say Ivanov, right?
Yeah, well, I thought that might.
He's I think what's been so nice about that is being able to show him to people who haven't seen him before, and taking that project to I was lucky enough to do an exhibition for the Festival of Architecture in London in 23 and take it to Modernism Week. So to take a sort of lesser known architect from Perth, the world's most isolated city, and then to take it to big cities like that and to sort of show people, and the response was just brilliant. Like to show people something they hadn't seen before, and I once showed the book to someone and they literally teared up.
Really?
And that was I was just blown away. I was just like, it was when I was out in Palm Springs, and someone I've become quite friendly with subsequently, and they'd seen a lot of architecture, but they just couldn't quite believe that this work existed and where it existed in the landscape that it was in. So as you can tell, I'm a big advocate for those sort of lesser known architects, I think. And it's like what we're doing with the stuff on Long Island and those works, or even some of the lesser known architects with the Q houses. Like we could have done that book and just done all Boyd houses, and Boyd's name's synonymous with architecture in Australia and modernism, and he's absolutely held in the highest regard. But we wanted to make it that was more of a survey of sort of different architects and make sure that we shine a light on sort of some of the lesser known ones as well, because there were some very talented brilliant people doing amazing work. And I'd say a big advocate for some of those people for sure.
So good, mate.
Yeah.
You prefer interior, exterior?
Both.
Yeah.
Both. I love shooting interiors, but I also equally love shooting architecture. I think because I worked with so many of those the photographers I mentioned early on, the people I assisted, and I got sort of got to see a lot of different projects, different scale of projects, different topologies of projects. But it definitely, I never wanted to be sort of pigeonholed in one or the other. So and I think that definitely helps in my practice, because I do love shooting beautiful interiors. Like I really love beautiful interiors, but at the same time, it's about telling the whole story of a project, and I think you've got to be able to sort of
good answer, mate.
Yeah. Who knows where my career will take me? Maybe I will become that rock star big building photographer one day. I don't know. Yeah, there's still time.
There's still time, mate. Favorite camera?
James.
Hard questions, mate.
They are hard questions. For ease and fun and just like cruising around, that little Mewtwo that I have is just, it's like a little pocket rocket. It's great. Yeah. I've had one, I just had to replace the first one I had. I had one for about 15 years and it finally just stopped. So I just had to get on eBay and get another one. They used to be very cheap, but like all film related stuff, it's all kind of gone up.
Okay.
but it's just a fun little travel camera.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've had I was quite sad when the one broke because it was out with me for a lot of good moments. Yeah. So yeah, that's always fun. But then I was lucky through some of the stuff that I've been doing with the guys at Leica. I picked up quite a nice point and shoot, the other end of the spectrum, like a sort of a Q3 camera, which has sort of become my travel camera, which is very nice. So it's sort of like a smaller version of what I shoot on for the sort of book work and the commercial work. And it's kind of like a very lavish point and shoot. Yeah, which is nice. It's nice to have nice toys. Yeah, I think I've worked long enough that you can have a couple of those. But yeah, it's no, at the end of the day, I think a good photographer will take photos no matter what, they'll make good work no matter what the camera is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not always about the gear. I definitely am a believer in that as well.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Most memorable building you've photographed?
I don't remember that one being on there, James. Most memorable building I've photographed. I would say just jumping out. I mean, there's been a few, but the Casa de Musica by OMA in Porto, I just loved that building. It was the first time I went to Lisbon. Maybe it's why I have a really fun, soft spot in my heart for Lisbon. It's very beautiful. Like it's a recital centre, concrete. The way it just sort of evolves out, it's very like monolithic thing that sort of just evolves out of the landscape. And when I was there were all these kids skating and hanging out by it. And the way that it sort of integrated with the neighbourhood, but was just in such a stark contrast to everything around it. Could be a bit polarizing depending on who you speak to. But I just loved it. Like, and I was on holidays and I went and photographed it in the afternoon. I went back there one morning at dawn. Like I was just drawn to it. I just loved that building. And seeing it sort of change and evolve like during the day. But there's also something so special about how the community kind of embraced it. Like I said, I got all these great photos of like all these like kids skating out the front of it, and it was like this big plaza out the front. And so, that connection to the landscape and that environment, ultimately, I think that's what the best architecture will do. It will sort of, even if it is in stark contrast to its surroundings, it still needs to connect with the people that are meant to be using it. So, I mean, I could definitely think of some others, but yeah, that is a building that I do particularly love. Yeah, I'm definitely always drawn to those concrete, brutalist structures. Yeah, I think I've got to do a bit of a deep dive into, a bit more stuff in Eastern Europe. But then, saying that, I was lucky enough to go to Mexico City a couple of years ago and go and see a lot of the Barragan stuff. And that was just absolutely mind-blowing as well. I'll add Casa Pedregal to that.
You can only choose one, mate.
Right? Oh, okay, yeah. Well, if anyone goes to Mexico, make sure you go to Casa Pedregal, because that was just a absolutely mind-melting experience to go and see that. Okay. Yeah. The house comes out of these lava lava fields in the San Angel neighborhood of Mexico City, and it's just a sight to behold. It was just spectacular, and I was lucky enough to get access to it to photograph it.
Wow, okay.
And it was just sensational. Yeah, you have to go and see it. Yeah, it's truly a magical building.
I'll definitely look it up, mate. Yeah, for sure. One misconception people have about architectural photographers.
These definitely weren't on the list, Jay. I should have thought about this. A misconception that people have about architectural photographers.
I'll tell you, I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
Before I met you and saw what you did in a whole day, had no idea what was involved. Zero clue.
We're hardworking. I'll say that much. Yeah,
it's a lot. A lot goes into it.
I think people are always amazed at how much goes into it. The level of detail that we work to. So I think people will see the magazines or see it online.
That's right.
And can flick through it, and until you actually go on a shoot and realize, like, there's a lot of the like technical side, but there's a lot of process that goes into it. And we sort of think, I always think of things almost in sort of like layers, like this has to be checked off, this has to be checked off. You've got to like sort of tick things off as you go through. And so, yeah, it's definitely, and over time you become quicker and more efficient in doing certain things. But we're certainly, I'd say, hardworking.
Yeah.
I once had a photographer say to me, if you ever find an architectural photographer who's not relatively lean, they're not working hard. And it's funny, a lot of us kind of look pretty similar.
Yes.
Because we cover a lot of kilometres.
Yeah.
It's but no, it's what makes it fun. Yeah. It's I definitely find a lot of joy out of the work and enjoy the people that I work with. So, yeah.
What's a nice piece of advice for someone young, upcoming, wants to get into the industry or on the fence, like, is it still a career that you'd sort of recommend and, you know, encourage people to continue on?
Definitely. Yeah. The opportunities it's afforded me, like the travel, the people I've encountered, the relationships I've built, the friendships I've built. It's been amazing. I feel like feel super lucky and grateful that I get to do this all the time. You know, like if I look at it through a business lens, like anything, there's always ebbs and flows of running a business.
Sure.
But for like a creative lens, I've landed exactly where I meant to be. Like I could never see myself doing anything else. My assistants that work with me and anyone that I sort of speak to, like up and coming, look, I'd say find your own voice. Like, you know, I would definitely say, you know, if you want to pursue it, like go for it. I think that there's, you know, there's power in learning from those that have gone before you. I think what's really nice is that these days, even from when I started to what's available now, there's a lot more information out there. Like we've set up this thing called the Image Makers Association over the last several years. And the way that we all sort of share information and sort of things about, you know, photography and sort of, you know, more industry related, best industry related practices and that sort of thing. We used to learn a lot of that through the assisting. But I guess what's really nice is that like people want to share information and there's probably a lot more sort of advocacy for kind of what we do. But I'd still say that there's merit in sort of going and doing the assisting, going and working for the photographers, learning the ropes, like carrying the bags. Like I feel like it's not everyone's path, but I would say that to me, I'm still really glad that I came up that way. And I think that it is still really important. And there's only so much you can learn, like going and studying photography and sort of, how I really sort of honed my skills came through practice over the years, but how I got my leg up and sort of how I learned how the industry works and how to work as a commercial practitioner came from those early years working for the photographers that I mentioned. So like find people whose work you like and go knock on their door and most photographers are pretty open and happy to have a chat. I've found not everyone, but not nearly everyone. So my door's always open, always happy to have a chat to people. I think there's, power in information and sort of, by sharing information, I think it can only sort of elevate the industry as a whole. So
that's a great answer, mate. I love that.
Cool.
Jack, it's been great having you on.
Thanks, James. Absolute pleasure.
I really love your passion for what you do and passion for architecture and thanks for capturing and documenting all these amazing, homes and things you're doing. I think it's so good.
Thank you so much, mate. Absolute pleasure. I love what you guys do and great to be here.
Yeah. Thanks, Jack.
Cheers.